Well, here we are again at another Transform Your Relationships live show. I'm Laura Rubinstein with the awesome and amazing Dr. Rhoberta Shaler. Hi, Rhoberta.
Hello, Laura. Here we are, just about September.
Oh my gosh.
So many things going on and so much trauma in the world. So, we're going to talk about personal trauma today.
Yeah. What is it? Have you experienced it? What to do about it? Maybe even touch upon. I mean, I think this has been a very difficult time in the last year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. As a nation, as a world, we are experiencing a lot of trauma. And you mentioned the word personal trauma. So let's talk about defining and narrowing it down. What is personal trauma?
Well, trauma in general is a deeply distressing and disturbing experience. So, very, very basically, we need to have an individualized understanding of what was a deeply distressing or disturbing experience in our life. So that's personal trauma. That could be generalized family trauma, or it could be the whole world.
Yeah. And when someone says, I've been traumatized, what do you think? Is it the same thing for everyone, or does everyone have a different experience?
Well, I think we could all agree what traumatizing experiences are if we made a list of them, but each person has their own individual makeup. So, what one person considers a really traumatic experience, the other could say, oh, well, it wasn't so bad, which means that we have to really honor our own experience. If someone says they're feeling trauma and we said, oh, well, that happened to me and, I just picked it up and got on with it, we might dismiss the degree of trauma they experienced.
Wow.
And so we have to be really aware that people process it differently. Just think about food. Everybody processes food differently. They have allergies, they are intolerant, they are violently allergic, or it's fine. You can't tell them that they're wrong because they're gluten intolerant, right?
No.
So when someone has a trauma and they're not the histrionic type who's always saying everything is traumatic, everything is dramatic, everything is theatrical. Oh, poor me. But if they're actually a person who said, I found that traumatizing, listen.
Yeah. So, how would we define what trauma is?
Well, as I said, it's a deeply distressing and disturbing experience that you identify for yourself that it actually was that. But where does it come from? It can come from society, it can come from war, it can come from terrorism, it can come within the community, it can come from abject poverty, it can come from physical, sexual, emotional, physical, or various kinds of abuse, spiritual abuse. Maybe people are traumatized by having been raised in a cult and finding it not to their predilection, right? Or childhood emotional neglect. That's a whole study area. We call that SENS. Have you experienced childhood emotional neglect? Maybe somebody fed you, but they never looked you in the eye. They never cared what was going on with you. They maybe met your basic needs for physical needs, but never met any of your emotional needs. And so you experienced emotional neglect. So your sense of self is disturbed, your sense of how you fit into the family, therefore how you fit into the world, whether people find you worthy or not. That can all happen when you're traumatized by childhood emotional neglect.
And now some people react differently to trauma and don't even think they were traumatized, right? Like they might have had that, but they don't know that they were traumatized. Is
That's
it a,
true.
I don't know if it's a denial or just not on a non-awareness of, or a habit.
Well, it has to do with our brain growth. Things that went in before we were 5 or 6 years old, we don't often go back and examine them.
Mm.
And what one thing research has shown us is that our attachment styles, for instance, are created in the first 24 months of life. Now, that's a big surprise to people because I wasn't even talking then. But your whole ability to know whether those giants in your life wanted you, were interested in you, how you got their attention. So many pieces create whether you feel secure or insecure in the world as two general categories of attachment style. So you may have assimilated the trauma and thought, well, that's just my life. And you may not be realizing the impact it has on your daily life as an adult.
Yeah, and I would say it might even happen as an adult too, like, you've just kind of been kinda like that, frog in the boiling pot, like, you've been in a situation and it's just getting worse and worse and worse, and then all of a sudden it's a traumatic experience, but it wasn't in the beginning.
Yeah, that can certainly happen, but also in that case, it's something you just got used to and you may never notice,
May
right?
never notice, right.
Become the way your life goes, or it's become your sense of self. Well, of course, people always do that to me. People always dismiss me. I'm invisible to people. Nobody takes any notice of me, and I like it that way. You'll hear people say that because they become so used to it,
Right.
and
So
it
that
defines them.
Yeah, that brings me to, okay, we all have different tolerances of trauma, right? It's like if we got used to it, if we don't even call it trauma, you know, how do we look at people and even know if they've been traumatized or even at ourselves if we don't have that sense of distress?
Well, good question. I mean, it's like abuse and very intricately linked, of course. Many times I'll say on my podcast, I know you don't like to use the word I'm with an abuser. And people will say, because often there's an audience, they'll say, oh no, I don't want to think of myself as being abused. But if you don't identify that, then you won't heal from that. You won't see what was done to you and heal from it so that you can change the way you're responding to life and life responds to you. So it's really important to examine personal trauma within yourself. And you don't know if other people are being traumatized. It doesn't show. Many people wouldn't know. But when people speak to you of events, you know that they could have been traumatized by that. Many times people come to me and say, "Oh, no, it was all right. I don't mind." Then when we unpack it, like, "Wow, I really should have minded. That's awful. That's abuse." Right?
Mhm. It's interesting, and it doesn't have to be like these huge things, or it could be a huge thing. I've even met people who came to a realization of some abuse they had in their childhood that they blocked out, right? They just
Sure.
like never don't even remember it. And then
Mhm.
through the course of therapy, they remembered it. It was very painful, but they came out so much more empowered after that. It was so they were always at the effect of it in one
Mm.
way, but they didn't even realize it. It's
No. It's absolutely true. I didn't really come to the full realization of the sexual abuse I experienced from my father, until I was in my 30s.
well,
I knew the sexual abuse I'd experienced from other people, but I didn't understand that it had become very familiar to me in my own home younger. So, therefore, when it happened to me as a 9-year-old and a 15-year-old, I didn't think the same thing of it.
yeah.
And so it had become something that when I really started to really dive into some few things, it surfaced rather quickly and, I put all those breadcrumbs together and got a meal, you know? That's what that was, you know? And I'll just give an example, like, one of the things that I had, it was a very vivid memory, I didn't have to retrieve it, was one day I was going out with my father in someone else's car, and this back in the day when they had bench seats. And so we got into the car, I was in the middle between 2 men, and my father draped his arm around me, and I violently pushed his arm away by moving my whole body. I remember doing that, but I didn't know why. And so when I really put all the pieces together, that was the end of his abusing me.
Mm, when you finally became aware.
Well, he became aware that I wasn't tolerating it, and I guess in that scenario, at some way, being with that other man it had become something that he just did, and at that point, I said no to it, right?
Mm,
And
mhm.
I was about 11 or 12, and I made a big fuss about it. So, though you may have memories of things like that, that you can begin to say, "What was really going on there? Why was
I
I so
and
moved to be so reactive to it?"
yeah, and I remember somebody saying to me, asking me, I was in some sort of like a grief recovery program, and asking me about something, and I said, "Yeah, I was made fun of for, when someone put a comb through my hair," and I said, "Ow, ow," and I was like, somebody just shamed me about it,
Mhm,
and I didn't even think about it as shame. I thought, "Oh, I have a very sensitive scalp," and you know, I don't know. I just didn't think about it as shame and how much shaming went
mhm.
on. And I was like, oh, this is a pattern. Like the light bulb went on, and it was, yeah, in my 30s as well. So it's like sometimes we don't even know, but then when we can identify it, we can do something about it. We can say, I can heal from this.
Mhm.
Um, I can I can give myself the nurturing. I can say, like you did, it's not okay, right?
Yeah, in a big way, a very obvious way.
Yep.
And, you may not even recognize it because things have become so common in your life, but if you were ever living with a person, a family member who had mental health issues or substance abuse issues, that's just the way your life was. You may not have recognized that you may have trauma there. That just by virtue of living with that person and the aberration or disorder in the environment, that you did not have anything that was healthy normal, right? And when you drive down from there, you can see, well, what do I accept in my life now? What do I tolerate? What do I react to? And I don't really understand why.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of effects of trauma. And when I think about the shaming example, I've used shame and didn't realize it was shame
Mhm.
on other people. So I think there's like a passing down of that too, if of the abuse, if you don't identify when you were abused. It could happen.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it would, it always does, but do you see that happen?
Oh, absolutely, because it's unconscious and subconscious, right? So it's just a quick reaction, and then we have to look at those reactions to say, "Is this the response I, as an adult, want to be having to this?"
Right.
Rather than reacting to it from a visceral memory place,
Right.
we want to be responding to it from an informed adult place. So
So
that takes a big piece.
yeah, let's talk about the effects of trauma. I mean, I think we see a lot of it in the way people act out.
We do. No, and you were talking about national trauma. Well, separation from a loved one, a sudden, unexplained separation from a loved one. Think of all those children at the border. Trauma. Trauma
Mhm.
forever. That's not gonna go away. They those little children, the children under 5, they're just forming, and they have learned that somebody can make you all alone in an instant. And the 2-year-old, they don't know where mommy or daddy went. They have no idea how to attach, so they're not going to, in all likelihood. They're gonna have a residual effect from that for their lifetime. One of the questions that I had about that whole thing is, "Okay, you put this policy in place, are you gonna pay for their therapy for the rest of their life?"
Right?
You know?
What responsibility is being taken? Is that what we call adverse childhood experiences, ACEs?
Well, that certainly would be, but it also is childhood emotional neglect because who's caring about the emotional nature of those children?
Right.
This is a political thing. This is, who cares about you as a human?
Mm,
I just don't want you. So I will rip you from your mother or father's arms and put you in a cage and maybe change your diaper, but maybe there won't be enough people to change your diaper often. Then you'll be parented by a 4-year-old who doesn't like hearing you crying and wants to make your life better. A 4-year-old who's traumatized and in the cage too. I
yeah.
mean, think about it.
Yeah. It's really horrible to think about. So the effects of trauma are long, long past the trauma itself. And I think it's
Yeah.
a huge topic to talk about healing trauma, but the identifying it is important.
Mhm.
Where can people go to help themselves recognize trauma, either in themselves or other people? Or what should they do to do that?
Well, first of all, give some credence to your feelings. Don't trample them down. When they come to the surface, don't say, "Oh, you shouldn't feel like that," to yourself. Notice what's happening. Maybe journal it. Okay, I have that feeling. Where do I think that came from? What was happening at the time? Who was there? How did I feel? Who was I looking at? What were the sounds? What were the smells? What was going on? Allow yourself to fully experience the environment that you perhaps remember, and then get some help, because this is not something you can heal by yourself. You can inform yourself about it, you can become aware, but healing it, you need someone. Like a lot of the work that I do, we have to do that because people are currently in an abusive situation. How did it become okay? Childhood trauma, right? So there's a lot that has to be explored there, and you can't see it from the inside. You have to have someone ask you the questions that allows you to stay in your experience, not be the questioner and the answerer. And then use some healing modalities in order to do that, and know it's going to take a long time.
So, something I see a lot out there from a lot of thought leaders, they've had trauma, they've overcome it, and then they think they can help other people heal it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. How effective is that?
Well, it all depends. I believe you need two things to be the most effective you can be: if you've had the experience and if you have the education and expertise. You put those two things together. But if you just had the experience and you don't have the expertise, even if you've taken some course that you feel good about, if you don't have a therapeutic background, let's take the distinction between coaches and therapists. I was talking with Marcia Reynolds. She's one of the heads of the International Coach Federation. And she was on my show. And I said, where is this distinguishing line? Are coaches supposed to be able to go into your past and talk about trauma and all those things? She said, no, not unless they also have been psychotherapists. Because coaches are supposed to take you where you are and move you forward, not go into your past. And so I asked her, what do you do if somebody is actually crossing that line? She said, well, if they're reported to us, we will discipline them. So you're asking a good question. How do you determine? Yes, somebody can be a wonderful support. They can say, I did it. Here's what I learned. Maybe you can try these things. I'll walk with you. They could be wonderful. But when you're actually dealing with the effects of long-term trauma, childhood trauma, neglect, adverse childhood experiences, that's a whole other piece.
Right. A lot of times as a hypnotherapist, I will see people and they will have been in a traumatic situation. I say, are you with a therapist? Because I can help you again with the work you're doing into the future. I can't help you necessarily resolve all that in the past. I mean, you may get some
Mhm.
resolve, but that's not my training, right?
Right. And that's the distinction. I'm glad you brought it up, Laura, because people need to know. Just because somebody's marketing says, I can help you heal this, that, and the other, that doesn't mean that they have the background in order to do that. And yet I know some wonderful people who call themselves a coach who have a doctorate in psychology and can, in fact, help you do it. So just be wise.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll always encourage people to go ahead and get that help. And as a coach, when I do coaching and I see people hitting up against the same wall, no matter what strategy we put in place to help them be more accountable, to get the thing done, to get them the right tool, to put it in time. And if they still are hitting a block and they're not able to break through, that's when I say, you know what? There's probably something there we're both not
Right.
able to deal with at the moment. Like I can't help you through something that happened in the past. This
Right.
is a great opportunity. This is a great sign that there is some expert help you need psychologically, some counseling therapy, some therapeutic assistance from people who can help you and guide you safely through the trauma, through the
Right.
experience to a healing.
Well, you could
And if,
help them identify,
yeah,
that that exists, and
right,
it obviously is something that's sabotaging the work you're doing right now because you just stay treading water no matter how informed you are, and that's really the perfect thing to do. Go back and work on this little piece and then come back to me and I'll move you forward.
yes. And I
Yeah,
often will tell people to do that. And it's really hard for people to take that step. And that's why I love that we do this show because it doesn't have to be. It
right.
really is as simple as going to a website, like your website, forrelationshiphelp.com, and start the process, you know.
Right, right.
And yeah,
And it's important, on my website, people will find that I offer a new client one-time opportunity of an hour consultation for $97. So if you have a question of what's really going on with me, what do I need to do, we can talk about it in one of those sessions.
right.
If I'm the right person for you, we'll continue. If you find that maybe that's not what you need, maybe you're okay, you just need to do 2 or 3 things and move forward, we can determine that, you
Yep.
know?
And then we can move forward with hypnosis, with coaching, with
Yeah,
marketing. But
yeah,
I like to work with clients who have identified their barriers and started working through their past because then they're all ready. Then they have the energy, then they have the belief, and they have like the raw material ready to go versus it being locked up in the past, right?
absolutely.
So
And that's a very important point, Laura, that you brought up because when we have things locked in the past, we don't have access. And trauma takes up a lot of emotional real estate. And we may not realize that it's unavailable to us because it's locked in there and locked down. And we need to free that energy.
yeah,
And not from a woo-woo place, but if you think of I have all of this that my mind is working on, and then I ask it to work on how to move my business forward. Well, there's not a lot left over, but we may not even realize that there's only a certain amount of bandwidth because the rest is being used by tamping down the trauma.
yeah. Because you're spending too much energy on the past and not even knowing it sometimes.
That's right. And
Yeah.
then when you realize that and you do that work, like, whew, all right, now I have all this energy because I've resolved the past trauma or abuse or limiting beliefs or whatever it is, but you didn't know where they came from until you did the work. They may have gone in there and you didn't even notice you were operating from that. And again, going back to those first 5 years of life, our brain development is not such that we have rational, logical thinking to the degree that an adult does or even a teenager does. So we're very much just, as I've said before on this show, until we're 5 or 6, we're basically a vibrating sack of emotional nerve endings.
Mm,
Taking everything in about how do I fit into this world? Do people like me? Do they feed me? Do they take care of me? Do they spend time with me? Do they hurt me? Do they not hurt
mm.
me? What's going on? Very basic, but
Is it a
very,
safe world, right? Is it safe
yeah,
for me to be me?
exactly. Should I be here? You
And
know?
then we make these decisions as little people that are not they're based in that initial experience or maybe one defining experience that may have been traumatic.
Right.
Um, and it can hold us back for a lifetime in different ways. And it can make us stronger in other ways too. So there's two sides of the coin. But at this point, I wanted to ask you, I know you have a community, emerging empowered community. Does a community type situation like you have offer the healing for trauma, or do people need the one-on-one work?
Well, it won't offer the healing because that is the one-on-one work, but it will offer great insights because you can talk to other people in the community and say, that happened to me too. So you stop feeling alone. And then I'm in the community all the time. So I'm commenting on people's posts and, well, think about this or do that. It's not the same as working with me, but at least I give you some direction. And then as part of that community, one of the big things, not only is it safely off social media on my website, so people can't get to it or drop by, um, but I offer 2 group Ask Me Anything calls a month, so people can actually come on the Zoom call and ask their questions or listen to other people's questions and glean answers from that. So it has a therapeutic component, but not the same as the one-on-one.
Yeah. And it also sounds like you might get some tools to start
Oh,
your
yeah.
own journey. And then when you then come to the one-on-one, more prepared almost to deal with the trauma and heal it.
Yeah, you
So
come informed. That's really important, and one of the things about the membership is that every 21 days, you get something new that's exclusive just to the members. So from the day you get there, you're given 2 ebooks. Then every 21 days, you're given a new video, you're given a new ebook, you're given a new article, you're given something that is exclusive to the membership that allows you to start picking up the pace, and then I've written courses and webinars and things that are all available on my website. So you can take one of those and work it through. Everything is there for you. Whether or not you're a member or not, you have access to the courses and the webinars and the books.
it's awesome.
But when you're a member, you get a 20% discount on everything except my one-on-one services.
Sure. It's really interesting when we think about trauma, and it can be very scary to address. It was scary to have happen. So I keep coming back to this thought that, we've got to be really gentle and kind with ourselves if we're going to address our trauma.
Absolutely. Be gentle and kind with yourself even if you're not.
Mhm.
But
Yes, please. All
but
the time. We're like that.
yeah, but particularly if you start to even listen to this conversation and say, I have some feelings that come up, but I'd never identified them, or, oh, that happened to me, or maybe from my little bit of story I told you that you remember that at some point you didn't want somebody's attention anymore and you didn't understand why. That can open your thoughts to, what else is in there?
Yeah. And it's okay to feel what you feel, and it's okay to, you might notice your knee-jerk reactions that you don't like and you don't know where they came from, but if you open up to them, like you were saying, being pretty curious about them, then you've started the path down, awareness. Maybe I've had some trauma. Maybe there's something here that does need to be addressed because I don't like this reaction, or I don't feel free in this part of my life. So I think that what we're talking about today is an invitation to
Mhm. Have a
to
look.
addressing your, having a look at, really asking yourself, have I experienced trauma, or where have I experienced trauma, and how does trauma show up in my life? And then what might be your next step to, you know, start the process down the road of identifying what it is, how it's affected, and then what to do about it to resolve it.
Right. And that's the important journey, is recognizing even just that little feeling like something's not quite right. Or every time I think about that particular uncle or aunt or whatever, my body goes, no. um, all of those things are worthy of your attention.
Yes. Well, that's why we're here
Yeah.
every couple times a month. It's been another very deep, fun, um, and not so fun, topic
Yeah.
to talk about,
Important, though.
but very
Important.
important. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's lots of resources on your website for relationshiphelp.com. And I'm always open to talking to people about hypnosis and coaching, and the feminine power cards as well for self-nurturing.
Yes. Yes. Important stuff. Take care of yourself. Remember, it's not selfish, it's self care.
I love it. Bye, everyone.
Bye.